Alright guys, winter is almost here. And I don't just mean it's on the calendar. You can feel it building out there. With just a few short weeks left in meteorological fall, the snowpack is already starting to stack up across parts of North America. The Rockies, the Plains, even into Canada. It's starting to look like the season's waking up early. But here's the thing. As we move closer to the official start of winter, we're about to see a pretty dramatic shift in global weather patterns. And that shift? It's going to decide who gets buried in snow this year, and who barely sees a flake. So, if you've been wondering what kind of winter we're walking into, how much snow you might actually be shoveling, or how wild these next few months could get, stick with me, because this setup could be one of the more interesting ones we've seen in a while. Just a few days ago, the Climate Prediction Center dropped their official winter forecast. And remember, when we talk about meteorological winter, that covers December, January, and February. Their map basically paints a split country. Colder than average conditions stretch from the northern plains through the northwest, while the south, the southeast, and even parts of the mid-Atlantic and northeast are projected to stay warmer than average. Then, you look at the precipitation outlook, and things start to get even more interesting. They've highlighted the Midwest, the northern plains, and parts of the Pacific Northwest for above-average precipitation, while much of the southern tier looks dry. Now, of course, precipitation isn't just snow. It includes rain and sleet too. But this pattern gives us a clue about where those bigger snowstorms could take shape once we lock in colder air. By the way, if you'd like specific weather forecasts for your region or city, please leave them in the comments. I'll answer them individually as time allows. Also, if you like the video and subscribe to my channel, you'd be very grateful. Now, let's move on. Now here's where I always like to go a little deeper. The CPC forecast gives a broad idea of temperature and precipitation, but it doesn't tell the whole story when it comes to snow. That's where we take a step further. You might have seen my earlier winter forecast video, where I broke down the global setup in detail. Things like ENSO, the Arctic Oscillation, and the overall storm track. If you haven't, check that one out, because what I'm about to explain ties directly into that. Our own seasonal outlook stretches from November all the way into early April, which, honestly, is what winter feels like for most of the northern US. And in that outlook, we're still seeing some strong signals for colder than normal air hanging around across the upper Midwest, the northern plains, and pushing into the northeast. Meanwhile, down south, we're seeing a pretty consistent setup for warmth, something both we and the Climate Prediction Center agree on. And the main reason for this pattern difference early on comes down to the ENSO setup. We're starting this winter under a La Niña influence, which means colder than average waters in the eastern Pacific. That typically drives the jet stream further north, right over the northern Rockies and the plains, bringing colder air and a steady stream of systems through those areas. That's why, early on, the northwest is going to see that moisture turn to snow in the higher elevations. While downstream, across the Midwest, we'll see a wetter-than-average pattern. South of that jet, it's dry, warm, and stable. But then, right around midwinter, everything changes. We're expecting a transition out of La Niña and into an ENSO-neutral phase. That's when the jet stream starts to flatten out and shift east. And when that happens, buckle up, because the Midwest and Northeast could be in for some serious snow events. Nor'easters become more likely, especially as that cold air digs in and clashes with Atlantic moisture. Down south, that same clash zone becomes the battle line. And that's where we could see not just rain, but ice storms or even severe weather outbreaks through parts of the Tennessee Valley and deep south. And on the west coast, as that ENSO-neutral pattern sets in, we're likely to see a drying trend, with parts of California, Nevada, and the Sierra Nevada running below average for precipitation later in the season. Now, we can't talk about winter without mentioning the Arctic Oscillation, or AO. This is the pattern that really decides whether the polar vortex stays bottled up over the Arctic or breaks loose and dives south. In its positive phase, that cold air stays trapped up north, but in a negative phase, it spills southward, sometimes right over the central and eastern US, and from what I'm seeing, we're probably going to see several negative AO phases this year, meaning multiple rounds of Arctic outbreaks could blast through the country. When that happens, that's when you start to see those Alberta clippers sweeping in from Canada, those fast-moving. Compact systems that race across the northern plains, the Midwest, and into the Northeast. They're not huge snow producers individually, but when you get several of them in a row, that snow really starts to pile up. And for the Northeast, oh man, this could be the year of the nor'easter. With those colder air masses locked in and plenty of Atlantic moisture to work with, the setup is there for multiple big coastal systems to form. The kind that can dump feet of snow over New York, New England, and even parts of Pennsylvania. Down south, though, it's a different story. We could be looking at a winter that's more about ice than snow, especially across the Ohio Valley, Missouri, Kentucky, and Tennessee. Those areas could see several rounds where warm, moist air rides over cold ground, creating the perfect setup for freezing rain and potentially major ice storms. Now, let's put some of this into perspective. When we talk about above-average snowfall, that looks different depending on where you are. In the northern plains, an above-average year might mean 40 inches instead of 25. In the Rockies or the Northeast, that could mean hundreds of inches instead of just dozens. Even in the South, 2 or 3 inches can count as a big year, so everything's relative. But here's what I'm thinking overall for this winter. Above-average snowfall for much of the Midwest, the northern plains and the Northeast, well above average in the Appalachians, upstate New York and New England, likely thanks to increased nor'easter activity. Heavy lake effect snow around the Great Lakes, especially Michigan and Ohio, as cold air blasts over the warmer lakes in midwinter. And below average snowfall for the Southwest and most of the West Coast, particularly the Sierra Nevada and parts of California. That said, the West might still get a few early season snows before things dry out later in the winter. So, if you're out there and love skiing, don't wait too long to hit the slopes. As for precipitation overall, it lines up pretty closely with what we've discussed. Wetter than average across the Midwest and Northeast, with some spots likely dealing with mixed precipitation and ice. Drier conditions will dominate across the southern states and even into southern Canada, where it might just be too cold for much precipitation at all later in the season. Now, as we move into Thursday, October 23rd, things start to change fast. Over the Four Corners region, we'll start to see more action, rain mixing with snow at higher elevations. And that same showery pattern continues around the Great Lakes, the Ohio Valley, and the Northeast. Then by Friday the 24th, it's like flipping a switch. Thunderstorms start firing up across the south-central states, heavier showers develop, and another storm system rolls onshore into the Pacific Northwest, bringing steady rain. And eventually, more mountain snow. What's interesting here is how slow this whole setup is moving. Even by Saturday the 25th, the same general regions are still seeing activity. The Northwest stays active, lower elevations picking up rain while those high peaks start building snowpack. The central states remain stormy with widespread showers and thunderstorms. You can almost feel the atmosphere pulsing with energy as these systems reload one after another. But here's the real kicker. This isn't a one-and-done pattern. As one trough lifts out, another one digs in right behind it. That's why I'm calling this a back-to-back setup. You barely get a chance to warm up before the next round of cold air comes barreling in. And when we look at the temperature models later, you'll see what I mean. The warm-ups between these cooldowns are almost non-existent. By Sunday the 26th, that unsettled weather continues across the Northwest. More rain, more mountain snow, this time expanding deeper into the northern Rockies. The central U.S. action shifts east into the deep south with more showers and storms firing there. Meanwhile, the east stays chilly. That trough doesn't want to budge, while the ridge over the central U.S. kind of holds its ground. So, even though the west cools down temporarily, the east stays locked in that cooler flow. Alright, if you'd like specific weather forecasts for your region or city, leave your region or city in the comments. I'll answer them individually as I have time. Commenting is completely free. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.